Men of the ancient builders' guilds put the utmost of craftsmanship into the intricacies of roof structure. For the roof in Samoa is the house, in this gentle climate where no walls are needed but a palm leaf curtain.
One thing I could say is a lot of the knowledge to building the fale was kind of kept secret amongst the Tufuga themselves. They didn't really share that. The origin stories, they just liked having something that no one else had. I think having knowledge meant that they had power that no one else had. Yeah. For me, I try to look at the orientation of the site, where the wind's coming from, where the sun is going to rise and where it's going to set. All those things are going to have an impact on how comfortable the building will be. The brief from the client was for Fale Samoa, but I don't think they expected it to be as traditional. The way a Samoan fale comes together, it's all about supporting the ridge, the au-au, or also known as the taulunga. The whole structure is about propping that up and holding it there in the air.
If you ask anyone, they'll have their own stories behind it. Some people would refer back to the Siamese twins.
The Samoan fale you can see in a number of different other cultural practices, such as the tatau, which you see it around on the round sides, as well as the va'a. The Samoan fale was also evident within the va'atili, or the main va'a. So a lot of the Samoan fale was at the intersection of a lot of these physical cultural practices.
It's only until you look closely that you understand how much work people used to put into it.
There's a legend or a story about how the form of the Samoan fale came to be. It goes back to the time of Taonga. He invited all the Tufuga from around the island to have a whono, or a meeting in Manua. For days the meeting went on, they couldn't decide what was going to be the one design for the Samoan fale. So Taonga, he interjected in the end, and he said, make it like the sky, dome shaped like the sky. They came up with the first prototype, which is called the faleula. I guess from the Samoan architecture point of view, it's unique in that for constructing a curve, there's no under support holding these members up. It's kind of tensioned in place. They use the ngafa, what's called a ngafa. The distance of the outstretched hands is called a ngafa. So they can measure the size of a house across and the length as well. Well, modern units are very exact, whereas a ngafa is going to vary between how tall a person is. So I guess exactness is not very important in Samoan architecture. Top of the line, which is the faletali malo, which is used for meetings and receiving guests. Now, faletali malo were two types. The faletele, which has a shorter itu, so it gives it a more round appearance, and the faleafolau, which the middle is elongated. And then next in line you have the faleo'o, which is used for everyday living. And then in former times you also had the afolauwa'a, which is a canoe shed.
Because back in the day, the main form of transportation was va'a. The other fale kuka and fale umu, there was another kind of complementary fales to the two main fale, which is the fale tili and the fale afolau. Its rounded ends as well as its straight ends all demonstrate at different parts of the Samoan village.
You have the internal support posts, typically on the larger fale, and then you have the outer ring of perimeter posts, which are called poulalo. And if you ever seen a meeting in session, you'll see all the title holders or the matai sitting at a post or in between posts.
We always use these posts as a representation of the support that's holding up the fale, of the village as well.
In no context within the Samoan context would you see that out of place. And then in the physical construction of it uses different elements within the context. So from that village, they'll be sourcing a lot of the trees, sourcing the afa, and all of that is in close proximity to where it's being built. And so when we look at this idea of sustainable architecture or regenerative architecture, that was evident within the Samoan Fale.
Back then, we didn't have concrete, we didn't have nails, so we always used what we did have around us.
One feature is that you take natural raw materials and transform them into something very dressed and presentable. In the past, the entire Fale Samoa was constructed from the uru. If you know the breadfruit well, it's very twisted and it's hard to find a straight piece in there. The legend goes that they cut the breadfruit down and then they said ngali nifo. They chewed it with their teeth to dress it into a finished product. So we're here in the tala of the fale, the curved elements here, which are all lashed together with afa. You're starting in the slower piece here, it's called the fau lalo. And then you have the fau angailalo and the fau tu and the fau angailunga above that. It's kind of based on the rising and the descending of stars. So you have the lower series, which are called fau angailalo, and the upper series called fau angailunga, which is kind of the rising and the falling. This lashing here is called the fa'asele manu, which if you translated it, it's called a hunter's noose. So it's kind of similar to what was used in trapping wild animals. You have the sumu, which holds together elements that are perpendicular to each other, named after the star constellation, the fatu. These lashings here are called fatu. So yeah, it's the three main types of fafaunga afa. There's sumu, fa'asele manu, and fatu. Typically today when people build Fale Samoa, it's just following more Western techniques, rafter and purlin.
Within over the last century, really seen the slowing down of the transferring of that knowledge between Tufuga Fau Fale and the next generation of craftsmen, next generation of designers.
The teaching of the art form has kind of stopped because the guilds are no longer around. So for me as an architect and being very interested in the Fale, and also my background, my grandfather was a Tufuga Fau Fale, so I have a little bit of the knowledge. So whenever I get an opportunity as an architect in a new commission, I try to incorporate Samoan methods.
I'd like to say that there is a new revival, especially within the kind of a diasporic or New Zealand context, revival around traditional crafts of the Tufuga Fau Fale. And that's being sought after now, especially in the face of climate change.
We are currently here on a field trip. Today we will be presenting to the Women's Committee and the Village of Botasi our designs for the Women's Committee Centre. Before we started designing the Botasi Women's Centre, we were to do some research on the Botasi area, and in doing so we found some images of the destruction that happened from the tsunami in 2009. It was a really hard time for us, but we knew it was a lot harder for those that were here.
The small Samoan village of Putasi has been completely destroyed. Boats have been grounded, houses flattened, the tsunami causing devastation across the Pacific.
That earthquake generated a tidal wave which destroyed Upolu's idyllic southern coastline and changed the lives of many forever.
From the moment the earth shook that fateful morning last Wednesday our time, Samoa has never been the same.
What you can see along the coastlines are remnants from the tsunami, such as these ruins that we're looking at here. And so what you're seeing in Samoa and the Pacific Islands now are a lot more consistent and constant cyclones. And you can really see that over the last few years here in the Pacific Islands.
Ia e whaftai e mo ia e tō te rea e na manua. Ia e sa tō te rea tangata na soifo manu ia mai ai.
The women here in Potasi and Salelua are really good fine weavers, but they didn't really have a space for them to do that other than their own houses. But they were saying, you know, with your own house comes many commitments.
O whaere mako whale I kua ma whale whangolo komiki o leo se whale komiti a. Ie wia na lea i titi leo fi watasi le mako whale ngā whale whamare sungami. Le leo whanga nei e whono e whai whono al mato komiti. Ai mau te mana o sa mātou a whale mau te whono I vai asa uma a. Whai mātou whala langa I ma whai si au lai fo a.
To this day, we're still trying to find different ways to interpret some of these cultural practices. And this one, particularly this project, becomes an opportunity to revive the crafts of the Tufuga Fau Fale, but in a contemporary sense.
Seeing what we used to do back then and understanding how hardworking our people used to be, our ways of life, our lifestyle.
I mean, you see the fale on, you know, sports logos, on Ia Lava Lava. It's kind of an icon for the Samoan culture and the people, but you know, it's very seldomly built these days. So I always find that interesting that we hold it in such high regard, but we don't practice it as much.
People say that our stories of our culture and customs are told through our songs and our dancing, our tattoos. They tend to forget that our stories also come from our buildings.